Welcome back. We're in the final stretch of this course, and I want to thank you for your commitment to learning and growing throughout the last 8 weeks. In video 15 and reading 15, we equipped you to create a discipleship plan and understand what to cover. You now have practical tools for discipling others. But there is a bigger vision that we must not miss. Discipleship isn't just about investing in one other person. It's about equipping that person to invest in others who will invest in still others. Imagine if every Christian made one disciple who made one disciple. Within a single generation, the gospel would reach every person on earth. This isn't theoretical. This is God's strategy for fulfilling the Great Commission. Let's begin. Turn with me to 2 Timothy 2:2. This is one of the most important verses in the New Testament for understanding God's strategy for spreading the gospel. Paul writes to Timothy, "What you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful people who will be able to teach others also." At first glance, this might seem like a simple instruction, but when you unpack it, you discover four spiritual generations in one verse. Generation one is Paul, the disciple maker. He's the one who has invested in Timothy. Generation two is Timothy, the one being discipled. He has learned from Paul through years of traveling together, ministry, and personal mentoring. Generation three, faithful people. These are the individuals Timothy will identify and invest in. They're characterized by faithfulness, not perfection. They're teachable, available, and committed. Generation four, others also. These are the people whom the faithful people will disciple. Notice that Paul's vision extends beyond his own spiritual children to his spiritual great-grandchildren and even beyond. This is the multiplication principle. Paul didn't tell Timothy to preach to as many people as possible. He told Timothy to invest in a few faithful people who would invest in others. This is God's strategy for spreading the gospel. Disciple makers reproducing disciple makers. Most Christians think in terms of addition. They assume if I lead one person to Christ each year, in 30 years, I'll have reached 30 people. That's commendable, but it's addition, not multiplication. God thinks in terms of multiplication. If you disciple one person who disciples one person and that pattern continues, the impact is exponential. Imagine you invest deeply in one person every 2 years, and each person you disciple does the same. Year one, you disciple one person. Year two, you and that person each disciple one more. Total 4 people. By year 10, there are over 1,000 people. By year 20, over 1 million people. By year 30, over 1 billion people. The math is staggering. This is the exponential power of multiplication. But there's a critical condition. This only works if disciples make disciples who make disciples. If you disciple someone who never disciples anyone else, the chain stops. The multiplication principle depends on every link in the chain reproducing. Paul assumes reproduction in 2 Timothy 2:2. It's not Paul to Timothy and stop. It's Paul to Timothy, to faithful people, to others also. Every generation must invest in the next. This is why your role as a disciple maker is so important. You're not just investing in one person. You're contributing to a legacy of multiplication that can reach future generations. Here's the tragedy. Many Christians never disciple anyone. They're spiritual consumers, not reproducers. They sit in church services, attend Bible studies, and accumulate knowledge, but they never pass on what they've received. The result is churches full of immature believers who can't teach others. They may have been Christians for 10, 20, or 30 years, but they've never invested in anyone else. The chain of multiplication stops with them. Why does this happen? First, we have professionalized discipleship. We think it's the pastor's job, not ours. But Jesus didn't say pastors make disciples. He said all of you make disciples. Second, we underestimate what we have to offer. We think we're not mature enough or qualified, but discipleship is about being one step ahead and willing to invest. Third, we prioritize comfort over calling. Discipling someone requires time and sacrifice, but Jesus calls us to take up our cross and follow him. God's solution is simple. Every believer disciples someone. You don't have to be a pastor or a seminary graduate. You just need to be willing to invest in one or two people who are younger in the faith. Paul wasn't a full-time minister when he discipled Timothy. He was a tent maker. He discipled Timothy while doing ordinary work, traveling, and living everyday life. You can do the same. The key is intentionality. You must decide that making disciples is not optional. It's obedience to the Great Commission. Here's a critical principle. You're never finished growing, and you're never too mature to be discipled. The Christian life is a continuous cycle of receiving and giving, learning and teaching, being formed and forming others. To stay healthy and fruitful in your faith, you need three types of people in your life. You need a Paul. A Paul is someone further along in the faith who can mentor you. This person has walked with Jesus longer, faced challenges you haven't yet faced, and gained wisdom through experience. This individual speaks truth into your life, holds you accountable, and models Christ-like character. Proverbs 13:20 says, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." If you don't have a Paul, pray for one. Ask God to bring someone into your life who can mentor you. Then take the initiative and ask if that person would be willing to meet with you regularly. You need a Barnabas. A Barnabas is a peer at roughly the same stage of spiritual maturity who can encourage you and walk alongside you. Barnabas wasn't Paul's disciple, but his partner in ministry. They sharpened each other, encouraged each other, and labored together. Ecclesiastes 4:9 and 10 says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up." You need a Barnabas, someone who knows your struggles, prays for you, and challenges you to keep going. You need a Timothy. A Timothy is someone younger in the faith whom you're investing in. This is the person you're discipling. You're pouring into this individual what you've received from your Paul and what you're learning alongside your Barnabas. This is where multiplication happens. If you have a Paul and a Barnabas but no Timothy, you're only receiving. You're not reproducing. The chain stops with you. But if you're investing in a Timothy, you're contributing to the multiplication vision. You're passing on what you've received. And when your Timothy begins discipling others, you'll see the exponential power of faithful investment. Here's the key. You need all three at the same time. You should always be learning from someone, your Paul, growing with someone, your Barnabas, and investing in someone, your Timothy. If you stop learning, you'll plateau. If you isolate yourself, you'll grow cold. If you never invest in others, you'll miss the calling Jesus has given you. You may not be called to full-time ministry. You may not stand on a stage and preach to thousands, but you can invest deeply in one or two people who are younger in the faith. You can pass on what you've received. This is how ordinary Christians fulfill the Great Commission. Jesus didn't call you to be famous. He called you to be faithful. Imagine if every believer made one disciple every 2 years who made one disciple. The gospel would reach every person on earth within a single generation. This isn't theoretical. This is how God designed his church to function. Addition reaches hundreds, multiplication reaches billions. You face a choice. You can remain a spiritual consumer, or you can become a spiritual reproducer. You can live for yourself, or you can invest in others. You can pursue comfort and convenience, or you can pursue multiplication. The choice is yours. But understand this: Jesus' final words to his disciples were not, "Go and live comfortable lives." They were, "Go and make disciples of all nations." This isn't just for some Christians. This is for all Christians. The question isn't whether you're called to make disciples. The question is, will you obey? The multiplication principle from 2 Timothy 2:2 reveals God's strategy: disciples making disciples who make disciples. 4 spiritual generations in one verse. Paul to Timothy, to faithful people, to others also. The exponential power is staggering, but it requires every link in the chain to reproduce. If the chain stops with you, multiplication ends. You need a Paul to learn from, a Barnabas to grow with, and a Timothy to invest in. If you don't have all three, begin praying and pursuing those relationships this week. Reading 16 will bring this entire 2-course sequence to a close by addressing your ongoing journey, your spiritual legacy, and the vision for lifelong faithful obedience to the Great Commission. Who's your Paul, your Barnabas, your Timothy? I want to thank you for your faithfulness throughout this course. If you ever need to get a hold of me, please reach out to the email address on the screen. I pray that God blesses you as you step into the calling he's given you.